Welcome to our 8th stream talking about the Akane anime and the manga that inspired it. Today's main topic is how your tools tell your story, and we're going to be looking actually a little bit more on episode 8 rather than episode 9. Our agenda for class today, we'll do our adaptation report, we'll do our lecture, we'll go over some class notes, and then we're going to wrap it up with our writing exercise today. This kind of came to me last minute last night, and I was like, oh, I wonder if we could do something here, because I knew I was giving myself a little bit extra time to work on this. And it's, a really good scope creep to be like, hey, I probably needed days to get this up and running, and then I'm like, well, now that I have a day, let me, add an activity to the end. But I wanted to add something else besides just the lecture to this. So I'm going to start with last week's adaptation report, even though we did show it there, but just to kind of, if you're catching up, or just to be referenced for today. So episode 8 was the Karaku Cup, which had 2 chapters, the Karaku Cup Finals and the chapter BM. So 19, that kind of was the what happens after Akane's first round, a little bit of like in between, and then the start of the second day and everyone arriving, and we get to know our other 2 like lead competitors here, Karashi being the one focused in this episode, and then we see his performance in chapter 20. This is nice in the anime that they only adapted the 2 chapters, total 38 pages, so it had a nice pace to it, and they added a lot of content actually. A lot of his flashback is expanded on. It does exist in chapter 20, but they kind of like doubled or almost tripled it in ways I think are good. Episode 9 from this last Saturday was Performer, which had 3 chapters. Hikaru's Rakugo, At's Performer, and Lull. And I was actually surprised we saw Lull, because Lull to me is the start of Akane's next story. But seeing how it all paced out, kind of made sense. I thought they would maybe like double or triple Hikaru's background the same way they did for Karashi's, and they expanded on it, but definitely not as in depth. But I also like having Lull to start because it's a really good tease for what's going to be episode 10. I'm very excited for episode 10. This is going to be, I think, the episode that like will hook some people if they aren't already hooked on this anime. This is kind of, I think, a big turning point. I expect them to kind of go a little crazy with the animation because this is her big round 2 in our first tournament arc. We want to see how that's going. And yeah, so overall 58 pages. So we're back to our original pace. Maelstrom, which is an updated a look there. I like it. It's still cute. I was like, wait a second. No, it's nice. You got the name change kind of little flashier. Although, how do you feel about the green? I feel like does it reset every time you come in? Does it reset every time you like change things? Who knows? Yeah, you gotta worry about that branding. I get it. So, our previously projected, we're almost done with this first cur. We've had a pretty steady projection map the whole way through. Here's what we landed on, and here's a projection for the rest of it, which is kind of where we started. But 2.5 chapters per episode total. Total pages adapted, very similar line, very similar actual line, and our projection is still there. Last week I thought, okay, we're gonna slow down. We'll do like 2 chapters through the end of this. We saw 3, which I think opens you up to do 3 again. I'm not. You say, damn, I'm good. I'm not good. The projections that were pink are just the mathematic. Here's what's going on based on what they've done. My projections have always been in white. My projections, unfortunately, have always been wrong. Yeah, the lines that are the same are because I should have just trusted the numbers, the average. They've just been really steady the whole way through. So the 54.33 pages per episode is the average we are getting there. And like I said, wrong again. Again, I thought they would do 2 episodes here, and so that Akane's would be split into maybe 2 episodes of 2, but it makes sense to do 3 and then an episode of 3. So that was our adaptation report. So let's get into the lecture. How your tools tell your story. In episode 8, we get to meet Karashi, or I guess we met him, but we get to see his performance. And this is his intro little like chapter image in chapter 20, which I think is a really great just like vibe for him. Really, really good little art page here. At the end of 19, we get this little like teaser where there's three judges. There's Isho, our big bad of the series. Um, there's the man whose name I'm forgetting, whose head is always at a tilt and has like short black hair that kind of goes to like his chin. And there's this guy whose name I also am forgetting. But he's from I think Kyoto, and he travels out to run this every year. So he's familiar with Karashi, and so we get a little bit of his internal monologue saying, this next performer scored big these last 2 years, but how will Master Isho react to him and his version of Rakugo? And we get this great close up of Karashi thinking, I'll show you what the new age of Rakugo is all about. So that is our primer for this. And then he starts telling his story with the opening line. Now, everywhere you go in life, you come across know-it-alls. There's a lab at a big university. A graduate student is about to unveil his research before the professor. And as he starts telling his story, Akane's teacher, who is here watching, thinks, the story sounds familiar. And the response here is that, oh, you've caught on well. And then you get a little page turned to, it's a modern arrangement of the story Tenshiki. It's adapted Rakugo. Now, it wasn't until my reread of these chapters, even like I think the second time I reread that, I'm like, oh, how have I missed this thing that's so very clearly in front of me? Like I saw that they were like, oh, there's the panels of both of them telling the story in the past. Only on my reread here did I realize that, oh, they're the same. They're the same layouts of panels in the past, and so I went flipping back to look at those, which we'll get to in a second. But the continuation here is the adapted, So while taking the setting and the keywords are different, the structure is the same. It takes the basic concept of a classic Rakugo piece and kind of adapts it for a modern audience, is how the sentence ends. And here's our first kind of like parallel of these two stories. So in chapter 12, I believe, Akane tells the story of Tenshiki, which is a story about this monk whose doctor asks him if he has any Tenshiki. He doesn't know what that is. He doesn't want to embarrass himself, and so he has his like younger monk go and figure this out. And in Karashi's telling or retelling of the story, we've got this grad student who is asked about BM and if he's considered BM in his big proposal, and the grad student does not want to embarrass himself by acting like he doesn't know what that is, so he asks one of his undergrad helpers to go solve things. So it's very similar structure, very similar like punchlines and joke, like flow of jokes, but it's adapted differently. And I always remember, like when reading this, there's this thing that I've been kind of thinking about. One of my questions of how are they going to do this in the anime was tied to some of the visuals of the storytelling. So we're going to start with that, and I'm going to go back. We're going to see both of these at the same time. Now, color here is added by me with Karashi's in yellow and Kane's in pink. So this is the first page where they're telling their story. Technically, maybe like second for both of them, but of these mirrored sequences. And I want to just ask here, what do you notice looking at these two things? What things are the same and what things are maybe different? They're mirror images in the panel layout. Yes, that's one thing I think is really interesting, is they hold the same like lines, right? But the poses are almost in conversation with each other, which is kind of fun. Although I'd have to probably flip them on the page for that to look a little bit more accurate. But yeah, they're mirrored images in all the cases. So like I think when Akane's playing the doctor character, the doctor is looking to the left. When Karashi is playing the doctor equivalent, the doctor's looking to the right. And so it creates a really cool visual effect here. And interestingly, the balloons can stay where they are and should stay where they are because they help the reading flow, but they just flip their heads in each one and it works out well. So yeah, they're mirror images of each other. I mean, the whole layout is like beat for beat. Like there are times you go, ooh, is this a creator trying to use the same panel layout from earlier? Is this directly an homage to their own work or just someone else's work or something along those lines? And here's a case where it's like, no, 100%. They're writing when they were writing this Karashi chapter, they said, we know we're doing this adaptation. Let's reuse the same panels. Or it's possible that way back when they were working on this one, they knew they were going to adapt the story. They maybe had it outlined this far out, and so they're even thinking about that in advance. Like, I can't wait to write the other chapter. We'll use the same layout. But they want you to contrast these two together at the same time. We also identifying, Maelstrom saying the interesting bubble shapes. One is kind of jagged. The other one has little nubs. Yeah, let's take a closer look at this. So we know we've got two speakers in each of these scenes. So Akane's first speaker, the doctor, has this kind of warbly look, which we've seen in a lot of her stories, right? We've got a warbly voice, and we've got her more rigid voice, um, and which is what carries up through the rest of the page. And Karashi's has this bubbly voice. So you said a little like little nubs. Yeah, it's got this little like bubbly one, and then a rigid voice. It's kind of hard to see in this one because it's against black. But if you actually look at even the line art here versus the line art here is also different. So the shape is roughly the same, but the line art is different. Um, Other differences, maybe not so noticeable on this page, but I think throughout the story, in both the manga and the anime, is like the language used in terms of like the grammatical structure, the formality. The whole episode is about this idea of adapting a story from the past to the present. So you have more modern language in his that they're using. And another thing I want to call out here is our little narrative panel. We talked about these panels being used in the stories to say like this is a more factual, sometimes omniscient voice. Oftentimes the anime is actually given this voice to like the woman who runs the Rakugo Cafe has sometimes like been our little like introducing it. Usually you have some Rakugo professional who knows the story talk us through this dialogue in the anime. Whereas here it's kind of like a narrative structure. It's possible you could even read this as this is Akane saying this, right? This is her narration kicking back in. And here we've got another narration bubble, but it's slightly different, right? If we compare the two of them, can I get both of them in the same? Do I have to zoom all the way in? Can I zoom part way in? A little bit. There we go. So here, same shape. They want us to recognize those as the same shape. But one has this like wider border with the little gradient, and the other one is a solid black. And while I think the fonts are the same in these bubbles, I'm realizing I'm pointing on the wrong side of things. Well, they're the same in these bubbles. The fonts in here are definitely different. And we'll see more of that in a moment too. So that's a fun little animation. That was fun to just kind of get the kick in there. So yeah, so here's some things we want to point out on the visual styling that we highlighted. Now we go to the next page for both. And again, pretty close to the same panel layout. We get like the story continues with Akane, where we jump back to our audience here, but we get the like narration boxes. We get the scene of the mentor telling the younger person, "Hey, I need you to figure this out," and then we close with another narration box. And again, what sort of things are we noticing? I'll leave this up, and then I'll do some kind of pan-ins here slowly. I think it's worth knowing we now have our third character. We've talked a lot about how oh no, it's changed. It zoomed out. We talked a lot about how different bubbles mean different voices and good different voices. So we have some good differentiation. Here we have the kid has this little like rounder one, which if we think back to was it last week's lesson or 2 weeks ago, the Booba and Kiki, right? It makes kind of sense that you have your older character has maybe the more rigid voice and the younger character has maybe the softer voice. Maelstrom points out that yes, the narration box and it mimics the title, correct? Right? We've seen this like banner pop up in a lot of the manga, and we're starting to see it in the anime as well. When they introduce a story, they'll give you like the full title of it, and that matches the narration box, and that's how we kind of know it's like a more formal voice that lives in this weird like, is she narrating this or is this information for us to catch us on the story quickly, and sort of mimicking the Rakugo sign exactly. I've been wondering if you would pick up on that. I don't know if that's 100% the influence, but it feels that way, right? That the sign that they flip over when they introduce a new storyteller, or which actually I think they used at the end of this episode too to say like Jugemu. So it is a title card for sure. In the Karashi BM version, we have again the adapted narration. We've got different characters. We got the bubble voice with the nubs for the older mentor. We've got the less rigid but still square for the grad student, and now we've got our Did he say undergrad? One of his lab students is this character. Has this rounder edges. Um, so yeah, again, similar things, similar actions happening between the two. I mean, we even have like the same staging kind of going on here. We very, very conscious in the same way that like a Rakugo performer is going to be thinking about their eye lines and who's to the left and who's to the right. Comic artists should be thinking about what's the staging of their characters. And so we have, hey, the doctor's here, the mentor's here. This is the mentor calling out to the child who's over here. Now that the mentor's here, the kid's here. Like that order is very concrete, and it also is matching here as well. Which I think is great. Uh, Interestingly, I'm even realizing that like we have the double bubble I've talked about, that like that bouncy tail. We don't see it here. Maybe not as much room to make it as clear, or maybe it's a choice to not include it there. I could see maybe considering this is maybe a more modern convention, which it certainly is. So a way to kind of hide that. Um, and Milstrom says, the new one feels more comic-y. The motion lines feel like Sunday funnies, even the character designs, because it feels like a newer technique. 100%. You are on the curve here, which is looking a little bit at the rendering. That's what I really want to talk about, right? There's things that have changed in the bubbles and the balloons and other pieces, but I really want to think about the rendering, the character designs, the art choices that are being used here. I harp and harp and harp about the idea of baseline and change, but if we think about this as the manga presenting us the baseline of this story, the traditional version of the story, and this as now the changed version, what do we see? What do we pick up in the contrast? So I'm going to ask this sort of question of what can we glean from the contrast, and maybe what does it say about their performances, the quality of the performances, as well as the performers' values. What do they care about in their storytelling? I'm just going to let that linger for a second. One thing we had talked about, in the first two lessons was this idea of like how do we know these are good or bad stories? And we talked a lot about like the doppelgangers and the different bubbles and the mirrored expressions and all those pieces. And what's really cool about what this chapter starts to do for us is say, hey, most people have been playing in this other time period. Karashi's not playing this other time period. How do we start to represent some of that, some of his voice? And it's even harder to contrast like the quality of the storytelling because again, this is a tournament. This is a tournament arc in a shonen anime. We have our power rankings. Do we know who's going to win? And if he was up against her performing Tenshiki, who would have a better edge? Hard, like we could kind of look to the text to answer some of those questions. Maelstrom says here that Akane's art style shows the characters in a historical period, so it feels more traditional. Yeah. Not only we see that like this takes place in that Edo period, where this one takes place in the Four period, but yes, your hands on the line weights are also heavier. They're varied. We're gonna get to that. I mean, it's the title of the thing, right? We're talking about the tools that are being used and how they're different. But it's that shift of like every part of your story is telling your story, and so making sure that you are using not just the words in the story or the speech bubbles in the story or the panel layout of the story, but using like the rendering techniques. So yeah, exactly. So let's take a look too at. So here is Karashi's story in the anime. The characters get a little bit of a glow up here. And here is Akane's story. This, and also to clarify, the level of animation is a little different. So when we get her version of this telling, we get these 2D characters, and they are kind of moved like paper dolls almost, and like rotate flat, and they don't really do any like bigger animation than that. But we get a sense, for her, and I think early for her too, because we weren't seeing a lot of it, of some of that like representation of period for her storytelling. For Karashi's, it starts flat. There's actually this great little gag here that as the character turns around, he becomes 2D and then continues. But this also gets into like all of the characters' faces are his face, which I think is really really fun, really really clever. They all have kind of have his facial features, but just like different hair and different clothes. Um, you're noting too, like even the rendering of like the nose, yeah, they're like it's different styling, right? The flatness of it all. One thing I think when we look at the anime here, oh, I went one too far back. Um, this is Karashi's face pretty close to how it's rendered most of the time, right? It is not as big of a jump of like Karashi in the manga to here. This is not him, and definitely not drawn like him. Where they're doing something a little bit different. They're adapting it in their own way. Um, yeah, so we have this. Another thing that's going to happen here, I think this is animated correctly. A really cool effect that they use in the anime is having him transition from just telling the story to being in the scene, which they do in this sort of like anamorphs like fade as he whips his hair over, and we get this cut. And also times with the character shifting to another character to talk. Really clever, really good use of animation. I'm a big fan of this moment, and like kind of almost what disregarding the manga just for a moment, looking at like he gets his background that gets animated for him, right? Where they're now in this world and the characters are appearing on stage. This is not unlike in episode one where kind of his father's performing. We had those characters kind of float on stage, but even in that case, there was more magic or like flair. This is almost more grounded in that same way, right? It's a different sorts of techniques, but we get the sense that like, oh, his story is coming to life. Um, and we even see, I think this is like a really compelling shot of like the backdrop even here is still animated in that way. And again, it's this great, just like all the characters are Karashi, which I just love. Uh, Another really cool thing that I caught on rewatching this scene is his like shadow self, which we still see the performer on stage, um, starts to act like will move with the character. So as this character like shifts, his chair rolls over, he does that with his sleeves. Like it's showing how that motion is carried across both and how it helps sell these characters. It's very cool. Maelstrom was saying that it's kind of childish the background. Yeah, I was gonna highlight this for a second. So um, very much I think like if you look at the background here, kind of given like watercolor, picture book, kids animation, it's very much of that sort of space. It's not as like concretely flat. Like one thing that, again, I was when I was thinking about this episode, I go, "Ooh, are they gonna play with the line weight and the comic vibes of Karashi's storytelling to do in the manga? Will we see some of that?" And we don't really. And in some ways, like I part of me I think is like, oh, I would have loved to see that specific thing rendered, but I think they're also again, it's their own adaptation. They're making their own choices, and they're choosing the vibe of like they're still going for playful, they're still going for childish, they're still going for contemporary. I think it maybe reads a little bit less humor, right? Like less comedy and more just like kid or simple. Um, but it also I think leaves room for like growth in his own performance over time. Um, because you gotta turn those notifications on, Steven. But welcome to the stream. Um, I feel weird about spamming the Discord about it, so that's part of that. Um, Maelstrom, you're saying that style feels specifically comics. That's a good point. You're saying I'm assuming like this style here feels. All right, I'll start. I'll spam it. I'll spam it. Uh, so the like, yeah, maybe you can make a good point. We are dealing in a comic space here, so let's play with comics. Where to some degree, we're dealing in an animated space here. Is this maybe more comedy animated style? Does it kind of match up with those sort of things? I think so. Um, just a quick catch you up, Stephen. We are talking about the latest performance in the most recent chapter and episode of the anime. The performer is performing a story we have seen once before, so we get to do something really fun and new, which is look at how the same story is presented twice by two different performers, and kind of keying in on how the art styles are different. So this is the original one we see, which is based off the more traditional telling of the story. Um, uses these really cool, like uses the art we've seen so far, and then our new performer who's kind of like hip and wants to modernize the stuff and bring it to the moment. Not only does the story take place at a university in the present day, but the art style is this sort of like more modern comic-y Sunday funnies sort of vibe. Um, so I was highlighting some of the things the anime is doing here that's a little different. Um, but yeah, again, the anime has this like sequence. I think that's really cool, worth watching if you go back and watch performance. Um, so now just thinking about just the anime for a second, it's like what can we glean from the contrast? What do some of these shots say about their performances and their values? So a little earlier I said if we looked in the manga at the two performances, I would almost say they are closer in strength, because she was getting, she has the same sort of art style, the same rendering. They both, I think, have the same degree of rendering too. Whereas in the anime, they, I think, give Karashi's performance a bit of a glow up, right? We get this really cool like backdrop and the like sort of shadow effect. He gets full animated sequences. Um, Whereas her performance, we get some of this like light animation, mostly picture book illustrations, but we never see the backdrop. We never see any of those things there. So like again, it's my firm belief in this far along story that they have like nerfed her performance simply because they know they have an anime already ordered. They aren't worried about the week to week. They don't need her to be super strong just yet. In that performance style, they want to show her growth in these first few episodes in this first cur. Whereas the manga, I think, starts her at a stronger level, but she doesn't necessarily like grow along that way. So the anime, I think, says, hey, we know what the arc we want to tell for the season. We can bring her down a few notches. We can bring him up a few notches. And that just means that, uh, she gets to now prove herself against this instead. And, no spoilers for what comes next, but I think we can all tell that the story is pushing us towards like, what does she have waiting in store? What is her secret up her sleeve for this? So we already started talking about this. I think there's no way to get around it, but I did split my questions. Like, what do these art styles sort of evoke that are different from one another? And I went digging for some art. So this is some Edo period art. This one I think this is 1730. I am not a Japanese historian. I'm not a Japanese arts historian. This is mostly just going off of like quick understandings of periods of time. But I looked at a lot of art, and what was interesting to me is I think in preparing for this, thinking about this, I'm thinking a lot about these varied line weights, these sort of like heavier strokes, the not just the character design or style, but just some of the elements that go into that. And actually, when looking at a lot of this art, I'm like, oh, there's actually a lot of like really flat lines, a lot of really like the same line used in a lot of places in ways where it's not being varied. That I was like, oh, in my head, it's a lot more rougher or varied, but it's not completely true. But if you look at like some, I think elements of nature often they'll play a lot more with the brush stroke and the effect of that. This too actually believe is even a woodblock print, which is kind of cool. Also, lots of use of textiles and things, which I think are also really tied to Karashi's character, which is interesting. Is he has a lot of textile use in his designs and in costumes and clothes he wears, which I think is a really fun way to have like I don't know how to say this. Like one thing I think the anime does is really good that builds on his characters. It's clear that he cares about the classics. He can't just show up and make better modern stories without knowing the classics, and I like that a lot for him. Yeah, the clothes have a heavier weight than the faces, right? It's almost like true. It's like the face. There's a lot of effort to like make it clear and defined, but yeah, you see like in the sleeve here, like those shifts of weight. Like it's a lot more a looser variety there. I have some more images that we maybe can go digging into if we care to later, but this was just the one I wanted to pull. And then for Karashi's telling, I grabbed some of the references. So this is Shin-chan, which is anime. I don't know if there's a manga of this as well, or I think the anime was first, but could be wrong. But it's a comedy. You've got like these really thin stylings of things, and a lot of this is like to some degree like economical. It's easier to probably render a lot of these things with a single line than it is to worry about like trying to get those line weights. I think it's why in the anime we haven't seen as much of the big characters from the past being animated in this big style, because the moment you have to move a line like that, you have to really play with that line weight. You have to be really careful with how you animate that. That's not an easy thing to do. So it's why I think you see a lot more simple animation, like we even see in the Akane Banashi animation. Um, Also, this is, I think this is from Azu Magadayo. I could be wrong. Yotsuba. I don't know my gig manga. Um, but here we've got just like again, the line work is that same like single pen the entire way through. So it is very much evoking a sort of like era or an idea. Um, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoy this. I was like looking for like gag manga stuff, and it's so hard to Google image search things these days because like half of them are AI and half of them are just bad. And now they make it so hard to like download images. They make it so hard to like find the original pages. They just want you to stay on their websites, and I truly hate it. Um, that was fun. So one thing that I want to chat about is like it's in the title. We talk about the tools. It's not 100% just the tools, right? It's like it's what these tools kind of evoke or come to mind. And specifically, I chose these two pens because these are ones I just bought recently. I've been working on some more art, and I've been using a like Sharpie pen. It's not even like a normal Sharpie. It's like a fine line. I don't even know if it's called fine line. It's a different thing that I'm used to, but it's similar to like these microns, and I really like it. And it gives me a single flat line um, that's really clean and easy to write with and do some doodling with. And my art definitely falls around here. But I knew I wanted to play with some more pens and try some different things out, and so I actually went and bought this brush pen recently. I don't know if it's this exact model. This one I think is a little different to play with. And so like we're looking at trying to mimic tools that are from a few hundred years ago. And what's great is like there's this idea of are we referencing that era or are we referencing the references to that era, right? Like what we think the 90s are like versus like what the 90s were actually like. Like if you were to create some of that like 90s art or early 2000s art, what are impressions of it versus what they actually are? There's a difference there, and I'm sure that's holds true for some of the like Edo period art that is being like recreated or brought back into the story. Also worth knowing that like it's a good chance that they're probably using like a G pen for a lot of this, which is a really traditional pen used for manga because you can vary your line weights really easily with it. A lot of it keeps you from having to have like 18 tools. You just have one. You get really good at using it. Um, and actually, I also had the question that like it's possible that this is also done digitally. That while I think the majority of the manga is done by hand, I wouldn't be surprised if they said, "Hey, let's boot up the computer and try making it in here and see what that visual effect gives us if it's a little different." Uh, Another thing too that I think shows up for Karashi are these real thick borders. We see like on its cover thing, like this right here, to me is like more than that other line. It reads like a very certain thing to me. And at the end of his story, he has this internal monologue where he says, I'm taking the old traditions and remixing them to suit the ear of a modern audience. Look, I have a zoom for that. We got this, visual of him grabbing the record and playing it down and then, remixing it. And this is his big splash page because almost at this point every performance has had one big splash page with kind of like here's the vibe of it. And I think this page is dope because you get him rendered in how the manga renders all of its characters. But the world around him is his voice. It's his tone. You get this this goofy face here, this big bright sun, this background, these bubble letters, like all of this, and to me it just reads Sharpie. Like this is like, oh yeah, you're the kid who's just like doodling big fun art in your notebook. Like that's the vibe. That's the playfulness. He's making his mark on the scene. It's not necessarily like graffiti, but like in that same space of like rebranding and that ownership. It's really fun. To me, it reads really pop art. Let me tell you, if it's hard to find images of manga, real hard to find pop art online because it is all AI. I had to do so many weird searches, which thankfully I found this, but was not all what I was going for. But there's this great Pepsi ad that like I look at these two things, I'm like, yeah, like this is sort of that like era it's trying to get to with like the flat lines, the big bright colors, these like bubbly letters. It is a pop thing, and he even says, I think in the manga, like Rakugo is not just tradition; it's popular culture, and we need to treat it as such. And so we get his like his view, his values in that, and I think it's really cool. The anime takes a different approach. I do think that their visuals they use for him remixing is a lot of fun, which I can't show you because we'll get that copyright strike. But we play the record down, we get the turntables, the records like mixed together, and then we get this shot, and I do not know what they're going for here. I like, even though I knew they were going to change things up, we'd already started to see how they had changed things up with like the anime or his story is like cartoony and kiddie. It wasn't going to be the lines, not going to be the Sunday funnies. I still thought we might get the like the big Sharpie, the like sunshine vibe, like those sort of things. I don't really know. Maelstrom says, "Is this like a reference to something?" It has to be. In my mind, like it has to be a reference to something. If you watch this, let me know in the comments because I have to assume this is something, but it really comes off to me as like there's a little rocket, we got some moons and some colors and some bubble letters, and I'm like, what's going on here? Who made this call? And why? I think these are broccoli that he's staying on. It's like very like the actual animated sequence is very silly, very goofy in a way that I'm like, yeah, he's funny, yeah, he's goofy, but he's also I think very practiced and controlled in a way that this feels more chaotic. Does it look better in motion? Says Steven. No, I don't think so. Like they animate him like doing a little goofy dance. I'm just like I would have like look. I will let some of their pieces go. I will let the comic styling go away for comic styling. I just would have loved to have seen like this pop background animated around him. I don't have it here, but like Hikaru's background is like almost 1-to-1 what hers is in the manga, just like rendered really well. I'm like render this one well too. Come on, you're right. Yeah, the traditional architecture in the background. He's I'll say this: the broccoli trees feels so specific; it has to be in reference to something. This outfit feels so like eclectic; it has to be in reference to something. I just don't know what it is. Um, but on a gut read, I'm like, I don't know. And it's especially when it's like he kind of eschews tradition a little bit. I'm not 100% on the vibes there, but that's what it is. That brings me to my final thoughts. I'm really glad when I sat down to like start working on this. I'd struggled a little bit to be like, oh, what do I want to talk about here? I knew I'd want to talk about the art, but I hadn't really found my lens in through it right away. And I had a whole other page of notes. I had a whole bunch of other pages of notes tied to some of the other pieces of the adaptation that I didn't get around to, and like if I had started there, I wouldn't have been able to finish this lesson. So I'm glad I didn't. But in brief, I think one thing that's really fascinating, and why I actually love adaptations of anything to begin with, is that they, encourage you to kind of like confront something. They let you pull things out of the story, and I think one of the things that Akane Badashi does so well, and it doesn't necessarily hide it, but it doesn't shout it in your face, is that when it's telling you one of these stories, one of these nested stories, it has some meaning to the broader thing, right? Like, why are we talking about this story, and why this story now? What craft and her speed of speech and the way she works with the audience and the laughter she's getting and all these things. She goes, oh my gosh, she's professional. And the teacher has this idea of, oh, I just assumed this goal of becoming a Rakugoka was just a fleeting whim. And it's through the performance that she understands I was wrong about something. And again, without hitting you over the head with it, that's what the nested story is about too. It's about this older figure whose pride or whose like sense of I know better gets in the way of them seeing something. And so by pairing those two stories together in that way, we get to have this great reflection around it. And what's really interesting, and I kind of dug a lot into today, was like, what is the story about this time? Because we're talking about adaptation, and I think a big piece of it is like the story about Tenshiki is about not knowing what some words mean. It's about not understanding something, and I think there's a very easy sort of read that like we're talking about this in terms of Karashi's like, oh, why do we tell these old stories with this old language? People can't understand. Let's modernize it. But I think that puts him at conflict with some of the characters in it. It's that that like he wants to be modern, but the characters are dealing with this older text, and he even brings in some of the older text into it. And then I was starting to think about it in terms of like, oh, he makes a big show about telling this story and bringing this story to Isho, this like big, figure in this world, this huge traditionalist, and he's like, I've got the confidence to walk in there and show this man that like, nah, like Rakugo is modern and it's the future, and like, and catch up, old man. Um, and I love that idea that he's maybe seen, Isho as this like mentor or as this other person who's lost in old ways, and that this is the perfect story to tell him otherwise. But I think it kind of comes back to bite him in the butt a little bit, because he at the end is like, uh, maybe also does not see the full truth there too. And like I said, this is my rambling last thoughts because I didn't fully get this out there. But I think it's really cool that like by adapting a story and by showing the same story more than once, we get to glean different things from it, and that by doing it inside the story as a nested story, we get to get more information from it. And I just think the series is real neat for that. I think it's real fun for that. Um, and that's actually going to be a little bit of the inspiration for our writing exercise too. So that wraps the lecture. This is where I say class notes, but I didn't say class notes, so class notes. Ways you can support me. These live streams, which the last 2 weeks, it was not Tuesday this week, and the 2 weeks before we didn't have it at all, but roughly, Tuesdays or Wednesdays, 7 p.m.-ish. I don't know. Turn on those notifications. I'll spam the Discord. I will say this too. Like sometimes channel notifications are weird. I feel like if you don't even go into the individual stream, you also have to like go click notify me for that individual stream. So that's a pain. Thanks, YouTube. We got people who want to watch the content and they're getting in my way. I'll also say too, Steven, I don't know if you watched last week's VOD, but I did bring up the comic that you posted in Discord, so you'll definitely want to go check that out. Kofi, go to Kofi. If you want to give me a few dollars for me to buy a coffee, I think it's the idea of it, but hey. And Bookshop, which we're going to do a little bit of extra credit here. So in Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, there's in chapter 2, he's talking a lot about, like, he says that the vocabulary of comics, which is speaking about like iconography and symbols and things like that. Although specifically, I should not use the word symbols. But he's got some really cool stuff. He starts talking about like faces and representation and these sort of ideas of like reality versus cartoon, which we kind of see here. And he then charts this really cool triangle of like the reality, the plane of reality, and the picture plane of just like shapes and lines and colors and really abstracted things, and the plane of language and face. Like, so all the ways you can represent face, and then charts some like drawings in one or the other direction. And then there's this really cool thing where he puts a ton of faces from different comics across this plane, and like how they show up and what they represent and how they work, and then they're all sourced, of course. And so it's a really cool thing to just kind of stare at for a while. I gotta see if it's gonna animate on its own. Let me click again. To see the simplification, and he makes some really good points broadly about like simpler faces are not necessarily easier faces. Simpler faces, sometimes you have to capture more with less, and so that like contrasted to reality or realism, you have a very different craft in the art of like cartooning. And so I think it's a really cool thing to look at, and then just think about like even here, what sort of references do we see in that sort of like the pastiche of, there's a fun little animation. That was supposed to be, I think, a slide earlier. So yeah, check that out. You can go to bookshop.org /shop/Malion and grab the kind of Banashi volumes. Scott McCloud, we talked about Watchmen a few weeks ago. I think I'm missing a book that we talked about that I should put up here. And I get a 10% cut, so it's great. And honestly, if you just go through that link and then go to buy any book after that, I'll get a piece of that cut. So if you're in the market for some more manga, check it out. Also check me out on Blue Sky. It's probably my main social media network. Here's that art I was talking about where I used the single like line for most of the art, and I think even as I was tracing around, I used the same line. But these like warbly things I'd used that brush pen for. And then again, please support the official streams. Please support the official channels. These are ways you can see it in the Americas and the US. The dub is now available on Netflix if you want to watch it in English. I'm really curious to see it. I think one thing the dub is probably easier for English speakers if you don't speak Japanese is you can hear more of the story. It's maybe confusing to be able to understand the story and have the characters in front of you talking, but I think it gives you a chance to pause, rewind, maybe get more of the performance in the background, because we do miss some of that in the anime. This is a writing exercise all about how to maybe unstick your character. You've got a character who you don't really know what to do with right now. Maybe they're at a good moment of, oh, they've got these problems. They have to fix something, and you don't really know how to help them get to that place to fix it. I think some stories you get that moment where it's like someone just says a word, and the word seemingly has a relation to the thing they need to do, and they go, ooh, what a great idea. We're kind of avoid that a little bit. And even if you don't have a character who's necessarily stuck, you just want to get to know your character a little bit more, you can work on this exercise. Now, another name for this exercise is send your characters to the library. It's one option. Or you could refer to it as send your characters to the movies. Or maybe best yet, your OCs need to touch grass. That's kind of the goal of this writing exercise. Now, this writing exercise is, if my animation will animate, being recorded live as part of my Akane Banashi live streams. So we're editing this later. If it feel like you missed anything, you can go back and watch the full stream, see all the nitty gritty behind the scenes. But it also means my arrows aren't clicking. Something in the background is being animated in a way that's going to get edited out later. Let me tell you. Yeah, I'm missing a screen. Okay, what you need? I should be popping in here first. Where's my little TV? All right, now the TV's here. Let me get my little face back. Oh yeah. Putting my face on the TV. Look at that. Are we okay with it being additive there? You can kind of see me. A little creepy, like a little ghost on the TV. How about subtract? No, that's the creepiest. Why in the world does it normally let me like do it with... Is it not screen capture? It's definitely a screen capture. Window capture. It's window capture. Existing source. Look at that. Look at these two creepy guys. Very different. Okay, get out of here. Bye. All right. Shrinking it down. All this getting cut. Put them in there. And if I talk, do I bounce above the TV? A little bit. I suppose I could also get fancy with it, which is absolutely what we should be spending our time with here. But look, we're just going to do this. It's going to add so much realism. If I just crop out the bottom, nudge it down a little bit. If I was better, nudge it up a little bit. Okay, a little bit more. It's tough that when I talk, I bounce, so I can't actually see what I'm measuring. And then crop the top a little bit. And now I'm on TV, and when I bounce, I stay on TV. Convincing. Very cool. Okay. This is great. This is why I said it's being edited later. You guys are here. We're doing it live. Okay, so let's do an easier transition. Oh, and now, of course, that's not even an easier transition. All right. What you need. You need a character in your story who you want to get to know better. You need pen and paper or your digital equivalent. And you need a library or a movie theater or TV or the internet or just books, different pieces there. This is inspired by Akane Banashi. And in this episode, or what's inspiring, there's this moment where a teacher here does not believe in her student, seen here. And her student says, hey, I want to perform Rakugo. This is this Japanese storytelling technique. And the teacher says, you cannot make a career out of that. I don't think you should do that. You shouldn't. But the teacher does her job and goes to watch the student perform. And while at the performance, is so impressed, is so moved by it, that she said, wow, I was wrong. I think you should do this. I think you can do this. I think I'm going to support you in doing this. And the act of going and seeing this helped change perspective. And what's great is that the performance is actually a storytelling performance, and she's telling the story about a monk who's too proud to admit something. And so, in that same way, we have our mirrored character in this teacher who was maybe too proud to admit that the student knew what she was talking about. And so, I want us to recreate some of these ideas in this writing exercise, where we can have our characters interact with art, have them maybe get a revelation from it, but maybe even feel like they're just thinking along the side, because we all go to see a movie or read a book and we always have our brains operating maybe in more than one space at a time, and we might not realize that the art itself is doing anything to us, but it's also just a scene structure that you can have to help you kind of figure out some of these moments. So you want to prepare your scene by giving or finding a problem for your character. Again, this could exist in your story already. You are already stuck. You don't really know what to do. Your character is between two choices, and you have to write this scene of them choosing, and you don't want them just to be lying in bed thinking about it because it feels a little boring, right? So this is giving them an action while they're doing some thinking. Or if this is just an exercise where you want to explore and get to know your characters more, or just have a little bit of fun with it, just find a problem for them. Give them something they have to think about. It doesn't. You don't want it to be like a problem they can solve by like stabbing, and they have to be the best at sword fights, right? Because then they're going to just go practice sword fighting. But the problem could be, do I want to practice sword fighting or do I want to practice archery? And now they have to think about that, and there's your choice. So you want to give them a problem that has a choice in the critical in there. And then you want to choose a story for them to experience. Now, this could be a fairy tale. It could be, like something classical, maybe something like Shakespeare or an older movie. It could be a book. It should be something that you know well, maybe something that you like. Maybe it's something that has inspired your story to some degree. So it means something to you in the story. Something familiar, maybe simple to some degree. Depending on what your end use is going to be. But you'll want to just choose a story. Again, it could be a book, could be a movie, it could be a play, could be an album. I think like there's a world where it's someone's listening to some music, and that works too, but it's a little trickier. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take in the story yourself. You go and you read the book, although to be honest, if you want to make this a faster activity, maybe you just read the Spark Notes or the Wikipedia page. Or you watch the movie, you go to a play, and you think about your character as you're doing this. You imagine them sitting there reading or watching, and jot down, who do they identify with? What parts of the story grabs their interest? What annoys them? Should be theme, or what annoys them, not theme, but I kind of think it's funny because we're talking about theme a little bit here too. What annoys them? What stands out to them? And then I want you to start writing your scene. There's some rules, some guidelines may make it a little easier. If you are working in prose, maybe 500 to 1,000 words. Don't go too crazy with it. First person's probably better, so you can deal more with internal monologues, but a close third person, where you're just focused on them and we get a lot of their internal thoughts, is fine too. If it helps you to write what you're normally writing, great. If you're writing comics, I don't know, 4 to 6 pages, 48 to 72 panels. Seems like it's like 12 per spread, kind of. We're looking at that, but you could also do this in much shorter, much longer. And again, you're going to probably get some of those internal monologues, that narration bubbles, unless your person is at a movie theater and talking out loud a lot. Right? I suppose that could work too. I feel like everyone in Akane Banashi is always just chatting during these performances, and I'm like, is that allowed? Y'all are really rude. Or if it's a play, if you write plays, you write movies or TVs or your scripted things, maybe 3 pages, 3 minutes worth. Could be easy to go overboard, but the goal here is just kind of write a quick scene, give them a space to have some sort of revelation. And then here's your structure. I'm going to give you the structure. One, you're going to start with your character sitting down. Right, as close as you can to the action. They have sat down at the theater. They've sat down with their book. The curtain at the play is opening. Right, get them as close as you can to that, so you're not wasting too much time in the rest of it. You write that, and then you maybe write one moment of the story's opening. Right, if you think about how it's done in the anime here, it was just a line of dialogue. If it's in a comic, maybe you have like a line of dialogue or an imagined scene, or if it's a play, you could illustrate it too. And at this point, no commentary. Just they sit down, the show starts. You write about them sitting there fidgeting in their seat or eating popcorn or adjusting, right? Don't necessarily have to have them reflect on the story in that moment. Then we get a little bit of a jump forward, and we reveal what is eating at your character. What's distracting them from being able to actually take in the thing that they're taking in right now? They want to watch this, but now they're actually worried about. They've got two people, and they're both in love. They're in love with both, and what are they going to do about that? Then we get maybe a moment from the story's middle. Again, keep it brief. Could just be a line. In fact, I think when you're taking notes, just pulling a single line is maybe best. But if it is in maybe a movie, it's like how a character, like looks, makes a very specific face at a specific moment. Again, you want these moments to be the kind of things that if someone has seen this movie, you give them these 3 moments, they go, oh yeah, I know exactly what this is. Uh-oh. We're not going to worry about that just yet. I just got a little notice that said, hey, you're out of streaming space for your recording. Whoopsies. So that's why we're recording this on YouTube, and that's good enough. So one moment from the story. As long as I'm still streaming, which is good, but I've not been backing these up in a way that like clears up space on my computer. So very much, you know what? We can also turn record back on. Let's not be too silly. Let's find where the heck these all save, and let's say free up space. Let's find one of the older ones. We'll just free up space, and we'll free up space. And we'll free up space, and we'll see how long. Oh, geez. I don't know if that's one of my streams. That's like a 4 GB file. Huh. Yeah, I think these stream recordings are a little juicy. Now, will it let me? Ooh, the question is, did it record the first half? And I don't know if it did or not. Like, I would hope it'd be like, oh, let's shut it down. Oh, okay. What day is today? The 3rd? Unclear if it recorded the first half of this locally. And that's fine. That's okay. We have it on YouTube. And this part gets cut out for the VOD. So, it's recorded anyway. Okay, so you're going to grab a moment from the story's middle. And then, now I will allow you some brief commentary or reaction. How do they feel about that moment that just happened? What do they see? What catches their eye? Again, sort of jotting those things down. Then you get to jump ahead again, and you get the benefit of, you get to have your little asterisks in your prose novel or an extra panel to get you a sense of time skipping, a slow fade in your movie script, and it brings you to a moment at the end of the story. And they're thinking still, and they've made a decision. And the secret here is like maybe this activity helps you figure out what decisions they're going to make. But either way, if their choice has 1 or 2 options, write it one way where they've made one of their choices. And the last thing you're going to write, your character will stand back up, and they go off into the world. Now, this again is the Euro seeds need to touch grass writing exercise. The goal is going to be different for different people. This can just be a way you can get to know your characters better. Just a way you can spend time with them. You can see the world through their eyes. You can have them interact with art, and just kind of see that sort of piece of it. Or it could be a scene you maybe actually incorporate and figure out. You could also have a little bit of fun. You could also have a little bit of fun and give them another character to go with, right? Maybe 2 people went to go see the movies, and you get to write 2 scenes, one from each of their points of view, and then see what do they take differently from the same story. And I'll say this, I'll end on this note. If this is something you think, I want to write this actually into my story, I'm going to give you a few pointers to make this a little bit more worthwhile. One, you're going to want to make sure that it's at least like a parallel story, right? Something relevant to what's at hand. If it's too far abstract or too far away from it, if it's not picked with a certain reason, besides, I really like this movie and I want to have it in my book, don't do that. Make sure there's something that you can see that ties the 2 of them together. You'll want to consider public domain and licensing, right? If you're planning to actually publish this, If you're putting song lyrics into books, you need to get those sometimes paid for or agreed upon. That's the whole process. Same thing if you're like showing images or things from other movies, you're gonna have to license those within reason. So just keep an eye on that. You don't want this to like solve everything. Like you don't want them to go and sit down and see the answer in the movie and go, "Oh, that's exactly it. I've solved it because I watched this movie. This movie was so helpful. It was so great. Hooray!" That's a little too on the nose. Make it more subconscious. Make it more of just a thing that's playing in the background. Let your readers have fun and see the interplay between the two of them. Let your readers be able to say, "Ooh, I love how in this movie they go to see this movie and it says this about the main characters." Right? That stuff, honestly, very common in anime. I feel like Chainsaw Man, Jujutsu Kaisen, both creators love letting us know that they watch movies. They love to put a movie in a way, but it's there to provide some sort of commentary or context to the scene. And a final kind of note here to really make it shine is give them a good reason for them to go. Um, you don't, you don't want them to be like, "Oh, I'm stuck. I'm gonna go see a movie," right? It's plot. You get it. Any reason of, oh, so and so has asked them. They're there. They've got this book that they've been wanting to read for a long time, and they finally have a minute of free time to do that. Again, sometimes when we have problems, we try to avoid them. So you can even make it very clear that I could deal with my problem, or oh, my friends are going out. I'm going to go out with them. And joke's on you, sucker. They're going out to see improv, and then improv is going to change your life, and you just don't know it yet, right? Don't do. I mean, I guess you could do improv for this, but then you have to make out the story, so don't do that. But the same idea, right? Have them go out, give them some sort of reason, tether it into the action of the story, so that there's reason for them to be there, and your reader doesn't catch on to what you're doing. So yeah, that is my suggestions here. Try it out. Let me know how it goes. And thank you for watching. And also, if you haven't yet, we also have another writing exercise. This is the artist training arc, where we talk about taking big story ideas that you have, you think you've been working on for years, and it suddenly is so large that you no longer know how to start it, or it's starting to intimidate you. This is an exercise all about how you can break it down to pieces and approach them bit by bit and go on a bit of a train arc. So by the time you start writing, you're going to be stronger than ever. So yeah, see you next time. Oh, my head's still floating there. We got to get rid of my head here. Bye. Okay. And then for the VOD, see you later. And that's the rest of that. And I think I didn't have anything else ready in my other PowerPoint. I was going to end on this. Yeah, I don't have any shorts. Like I said, sometimes you get ideas for things you want to do way too late in the game, and the stream is a little bit of a work in progress. Maybe it's important for me that you all see that the time and effort goes into this. I'm showing you. It's free behind the scenes. Some people have Patreons where you have to see this stuff. I'm just giving it to you as part of the presentation. You're just hoping for more lecture. I'm also bummed that I didn't have chat up on screen because we did have some good things there. Like Steven saying my OC is allergic to grass. It's very funny. Shaylee Shine Wilson does that show up in Jujutsu Kaisen? Do they watch Castaway? Is that one of his he has to watch a thing and not get emotional? But yeah, I'm realizing when I was working in PowerPoint, it was much smaller. But now that it's full screen and I'm using this weird effect on TV, her eyes are weirdly look bloodshot here. It's kind of creepy. No, no, okay. Well, I thought I'd ask about it. Thank you all for watching. This is officially my sign off thing. I'm not saying sign off, but thank you. Goodbye. Goodbye now. Bye. Goodbye now. Goodbye.